In terms of Bill Belichick, number one, incredibly shocking that he's going to UNC. I don't think anyone would argue otherwise. Don Shula's record and so on and so forth. But I asked Rick this last week if he thought Bill Belichick was going to have success because he knows Nick Saban. He's worked closely with Nick Saban. They were together in Miami. Nick Saban fired him as GM back in 2000 or whenever that was. And, he and Nick have worked together in recent years at Alabama. And I said, look, here's the thing. And Rick, you know better than me, but here's the thing with Nick Saban. He can relate to these kids in a way that a lot of people can't. And that seems to be an avenue for getting the most out of them. And he's been doing it for a long time. Bill Belichick feels like more of a my way or the highway guy. And to your most recent point about players, especially 17, 18, 19-year-olds, having a vision of what their career should look like as opposed to what reality suggests it should look like, is Bill Belichick going to be able to be successful in the ACC at UNC, a program that was terrible this year, but they've had some moderate success, I suppose you could say. And how's this recruiting thing going to work for a 72, almost 73-year-old who's never, ever, ever had to do it?
I actually think it sets up for him quite nice.
All right, let's hear it.
Yeah, here's my take. I think UNC is one of, if not the sneakiest job in college football, one of the most appealing. I've always had my eyes on UNC. I love that job from a geographical standpoint, what the brand represents. We've seen it on the basketball side, obviously with Jordan as well. It's interesting hearing Michael Lombardi, former GM of the Browns, obviously worked with Belichick very closely. Now the GM in North Carolina, kind of talk about their vision for UNC and kind of what that represents.
Wait, Michael Lombardi is the GM in UNC now?
Michael Lombardi is the general manager at UNC.
I didn't know that.
That kind of changes things
take Rick
a little
with him
bit,
because they're
right?
33rd team, right?
Right.
That's Michael Lombardi.
It's fascinating from that standpoint.
Interesting.
But you look at UNC and you look at, all right, if I were to tell you the recruiting rankings this year in the ACC, what would you have said they finished? Who were the top 4 teams?
Clemson. I want to say Florida State, but Florida State stinks. Miami. Who else is in there? You saw me on Louisville and Duke. How about that?
Miami, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Clemson in that order. Clemson was outside the top 25. First time under Dabo Swinney, I believe, that they were outside of the top 25. So
nice.
You look at the ACC from a high school standpoint, you're kind of sitting there saying, all right, who's the dominant force in the Tidewater area? Yeah, South Carolina's doing some nice things, but have they planted the flag so much that UNC can't make inroads? No. Clemson.
Jesus. UNC 17th, by the way, as Debo scrolls through the rankings.
And that typically happens when you have a coaching change, right? So that's part of it. And that's why Mac Brown is not there anymore. But UNC back in 2022 under Mac Brown, they're ranked number 11. Now the game has changed a lot since then. But you look at Colorado. I was one of the biggest skeptics just in terms of I just didn't know. I didn't know. We'd never seen it. Deion Sanders took 95 transfers in his first 2 years. 95. Okay, think about that.
People were mad about it.
Scorched earth. Burned that roster to the ground, flipped it over, and sure, he's going to have 2 top 10 picks, right, and a Heisman Trophy winner. That goes a long way. But this team had 1 win before he got there in the Big 12, which I think is pretty similar to the ACC, just in terms of how you view the teams. First year, 4 wins. Second year, 9 wins with a chance to get to 10 in the postseason. And you got to give a ton of credit to Deion Sanders and the job that he's done. And he made some moves that he took a lot of heat for. He put Pat Shurmur as his OC, moving on quickly from his first year OC. And then Livingston he took from the NFL, and they were able to upgrade that unit big time. Now you look at Belichick, and, I'm hearing him talk on Pat McAfee's show yesterday, and he's like, it's not that different. It's not as different as I thought it was. And that was kind of my thing. Like, collegiately, I think these guys look at it, Belichick and Lombardi, and they're saying, all right, revenue shares coming in this year. This is going to be more and more black and white as the game continues to evolve. Every year this goes, it becomes more and more and more transactional. becomes about a finite number of money, and can you get me to the league? And if that's the case, these guys actually have more exposure to that than anybody else in the college game does.
Right.
They've lived there. They've lived under a CBA. I'm not saying that's where the college game is going, but they understand the pieces of roster building and how much to financially invest in each position. The scouting part, I think these guys are going to adapt very quickly. I think they're going to have to, I always talk about, when you go when I was at Cincinnati and I went to Michigan, people always ask me, all right, what was that transition like? Well, there is a period of time you have to elevate your eyes. What was the standard at Cincinnati, a group of 5 school at the time? It's not the same standard at Michigan, one of the best programs in the country. I think for Belichick and Lombardi, it's going to be like, all right, what's a winnable player in college that is maybe a PFA guy and, we can win with in the ACC as we're starting to build this thing up long term to have it kind of look the way that we want it to look like.
You know what? Now that you mentioned that, I don't know if there's been a coach who's gotten more out of PFAs at the NFL level than Bill Belichick, right? So that actually tracks. That's a great point.
So here's the other thing. They got their first transfer commit yesterday. And it's this center who's like 6'2" and change from Holy Cross. And I could not
that's the
wait
most
to dig
Belichick
into
pick
the
ever.
tape. And I'm watching this kid versus Syracuse. And I'm like, whew. I'm looking, all of a sudden, I'm like looking at our interior line board. I'm like, damn, am I going to love it? And where do I have him? I'm like, this guy's probably like in it, tier 1 priority free agent. And it looked like one of those guys that everybody else just kind of discounts. New England would pick up. And then all of a sudden that guy's there. He's a 7 or 8 year vet in the league, and that first guy is indicative kind of who they are and who they want to be. And I can see every team looking at that guy and saying, we want a little bit bigger. We want a little bit longer. We want a little bit more proven. And it probably the same thing that happened in the NFL. And then you get to college and Belichick's looking at him and say, oh yeah, I'll take him.
It's funny.
So it's going to be fun, man.
Do you remember Ted Carris, center out of Illinois, interior offensive lineman? He's been in the league for over a decade now. I talked to him at one of the Super Bowls 6-7 years ago when he was with the Patriots, and I was asking about his draft process, and he said, "You know what? I had my pro day, and I think he said one team showed up. It was the Patriots. Legendary coach Dante Scarnecchia showed up, worked me out. They liked me. He was undersized, wasn't a great athlete. They drafted him on day 3 at some point, and he's been playing for 10 years. He's playing with the Bengals now, and he's like, yeah, they were the only team that showed interest. I didn't ask why. He may have had short arms, whatever. But there's a type, right? You talk about your buddy having a type. Belichick has a type, and it's usually the lunch pail guy, as we like to call him.
No, I mean, it's I'm watching this guy. I'm like, okay, and it's I mean, I'm cracking up laughing because it's the first guy that they sign, and I think I don't want to say exploit, but I think they're going to do a really, really good job kind of in that gray area where everybody's up here and they're floating with the top targets. And, obviously they need talent just like everybody else does. But there's a level of conviction and credibility that they bring to the operation where I think, when I used to work on it, I think the thing that can hurt you the most in the evaluation process, in the portal process, is hesitation. Just not having confidence in your process. And, because you start to meddle a little bit and you say, well, there's low hanging fruit over here. Maybe we want to go this way. Or, hey, you know what? I don't know. Keep them on the back burner versus, Belichick, Lombardi, the synergy. Obviously, they've been doing this for a long time. They know who they are.
Right.
And the best teams in the portal know who they are. They're established. Oregon is one of the best. Ole Miss is one of the best. LSU right now is having a great cycle because these guys have done the work. They're prepared. They know what they need, and they're convicted, and they got the money right. It's all allocated. So it's been, I'll tell you what, man, it's been such a blast just watching these teams. Texas Tech has been phenomenal in the portal. They go out, they get this FCS All-American safety who's banged up a little bit this year from North Dakota State, Wisniewski. They grabbed a couple guys, grab a corner out of Mississippi State, a receiver out of Miami, Ohio. And I think people always wonder, like, oh, where'd this team come from? But this is like what's happening right now is like the next frontier of college football. And I don't think people really get it. But it's so important, because next year you might look up and you're like, Texas Tech, what the hell?
Yeah, I will be doing that.
But if you're following this, you can see it, but it's so untapped. So I love following it because you can get a sense kind of what teams are trying to do, who they're trying to be. Maybe we could have seen Georgia Tech coming right before they had the year that they had, right? So Syracuse as well, right? So
shout out Fran Brown. Man.
Shout out Fran Brown. Doing a hell of a job.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I live in Syracuse, so I've been a couple games, and the energy that man coaches, let alone sort of recruits and does the other thing. He's been fun, and it's been fun for the town who's needed something uplifting, at least with the football program. One quick thing on Belichick, and then we'll get out of here. Maybe two, because I always have a ton of questions for you. As you're talking, like, I'm sold. Like, I was skeptical until the last 15 minutes, and it feels like almost, I don't want to oversell it, but like sort of a Billy Bean Moneyball situation where they found the market deficiencies and they found their sort of Kevin Youkilis Greek god of walks in the form of this center, for example, at a Holy Cross. But they're going to find these guys that maybe are undervalued because of size or speed or whatever, and get the most out of them, because their advantage is being able to coach these kids up, and they have obviously the resume to do it. Is there any concern that this could be going back to Belichick's personality, and his players love him or hate him? He's not, Tom Brady jokes all the time that he's not the fuzziest, warmest guy. And maybe he doesn't need to be, but is there any concern that when you're dealing with 17, 18, 19-year-olds, it could be a one and done situation where once you get 1 year out of them, maybe they go into the portal? Or is that not, you just keep bringing it, you just keep the sort of conveyor belt going?
I mean, I think everybody's dealing with it. I think the biggest thing that has stuck out to me this entire week or so since Belichick has been hired, I was at an all-star game, high school all-star game down in Mobile, and I asked one of the players who's going to Texas A&M. I said, hey, what are your thoughts on Bill Belichick going to North Carolina? And he said, who?
I was going to ask you, did he know who he was?
And, you think about it, when Bill Belichick won his last Super Bowl, these guys enrolling in school were 12 years old.
Crazy.
So the other part of this is like, I think North Carolina needs to be extremely self-aware about the fact that the PR, the marketing machine, they have work to do. It's not prime time Deion Sanders. It's, when Deion got hired, Deion was like one of the best things about him. I mean, he was just a walking marketing machine. This guy had a show on Prime. He had a son that was extremely popular on socials. Belichick, where it's like, yeah, he's got credibility with you and me. He's got credibility, cachet within the personnel community and the coaching community and the adults that have watched him and watched Brady and those teams. But to the teenagers, there's still a bridge to gap. The other part of this is like in terms of getting to these guys, I actually think Belichick is aware like of what needs to be done. And does that mean he's going to change? No, I don't think he should change. But I also think he's acutely aware of the fact that he's not coaching Tom Brady.
Right.
He's coaching 17-year-old freshman Bryce Baker. And it's a different type of relationship that you're going to have with that type of player. I just watching those two kind of interact, and the way he said is like, even him saying, it's great to have Bryce here. And it's like, I know he's not used to that. That's probably him doing a little bit more than he's ever done in the past. But that's a little incremental step of him playing the game. So I think the fact that he's, willing, and maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but I think the fact that he's shown that he's been willing to do that. And I think, North Carolina can like cover them up. There's some coaches out there, I won't name names, there's some high-level coaches. These cats don't recruit, man.
Okay.
And I'll tell you this, but their operation moves on because now they're in a game where it's like, hey, we love you. We'll get you on the field. We'll develop you. You'll play at the highest level. And we have the most competitive offer at the end of the day. The other stuff is kind of like, it's out the window. That traditional recruitment stuff. I always talk about it. You got to win the traditional recruitment, and then you have to win the NIL recruitment. And the traditional recruitment has just become less and less important. Now think of it as like a top 30 visit, where I got 3 teams that I'm going to visit, and I'm Jesse Bates, and I'm a safety, and I'm going to the Falcons, I'm going to the Saints, and I got a 1-year. I'm a 1-year contract, and who's going to get me to my next stop?
Because this is less about taking care of my baby and more about, as you mentioned, transactional. We're looking to get paid because this is a job.
And the more transactional the college game becomes, the more beneficial it is for Bill Belichick. And it's never been more transactional than it is right now.
Once again, he's outfoxed the fox. He knows what he's doing. Golly. Because I was like, I don't know. Because I grew up in North Carolina. I'm a UNC fan. Care more about basketball than football. But I was like, all right, he's going to go there. This feels like a pit stop for him, maybe to try to get his foot back in the door. But you sold me.
Can I make one more point?
Yeah, of course.
Regardless of how this experiment works out on the field, I think him hiring Lombardi, and Lombardi, we'll see what happens. But if Lombardi decides to build a front office and emulate everything he's done in the NFL, it's going to change the game of college football forever. And in a better way. I think from an infrastructure standpoint, the game has been slowly gravitating. Oh, they're general managers and they do this. Oh, there's director of college scouting. There's been little parts of it where the game has slowly gravitated towards what they're doing in the NFL. I think Lombardi's going to come in and just be like, this is what we had on Sundays, and I'm going to build it on Saturdays. And the way that it works in the college game is everybody sees that, and they say, well, okay, hold on. If Belichick's doing it, we got to do it. And that's what happened with Saban at Alabama. He built the first recruiting department. And after that, you saw schools building and trying to emulate, and they had no idea what they're doing. But they knew Alabama had it, so they had to build some version of that. So like I said, I don't know what it's going to look like on the field, but these guys, their presence alone, I believe if they do what I think they're going to do, is going to advance the sport in a major way from a personnel standpoint, which I'm extremely, extremely excited about.